Good evening, members and officers. Welcome to this meeting of the Executive, 13th of June 2022. Can I first of all take apologies for absence? I've received from Councillor Danielle Belton, who has another engagement she couldn't miss this evening. Other than that, looking around the room, I think everyone is here. So no other apologies other than Councillor Belton. Moving on to item 2, despite chairs out for an assembly hall, there aren't any other members of the public here, but there is one non-member of the executive attending, and a warm welcome to Councillor Stuart Wilson. Welcome. Thank you, and we'll be hearing from you later, no doubt, Councillor Wilson. Moving on to item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of March 2022. They have been circulated, and in some agenda packs they're included. Members, are you content for me to sign those minutes? Do you agree them for me to sign? Agreed? Thank you very much. Agenda item 4, to receive declarations of interest on any items on the agenda. Any declarations to be made? No. Moving on to item 5, questions on notice from councillors, and none have been received. Which takes us nicely on to matters referred to the executive and reports from other committees, and there are none. So we're making good progress with this agenda. Item 7, the Economic Growth Strategy 2022 to 2025. The way I'm going to play this, Councillor Ward, if you can just very briefly introduce it, and I'm sure you will hand over to, I beg your pardon, Councillor Ward, it's Councillor Belton who is missing. That's, yes, my brain is running slow tonight. You looked a little bit surprised there, but your turn will come in a moment for the last item. I will refer to Mr. Hotton to take us through the Economic Growth Strategy, please. Mr. Hotton.
Thank you. Good evening, members. The Economic Growth Strategy before you this evening sets out the key themes, priorities and objectives that as a council we aspire to deliver. It replaces the last such strategy from 2017 and is based on 3 main themes: supporting local business growth, attracting new investment and improving the skills base of residents. These themes provide a set of deliverable objectives for the next 3 years that reflect the council's current ambitions, and the draft strategy as such is appended to the report. This was taken through overview and scrutiny, and you'll see that you've got an addendum that supports this original report that Councillor Wilson will then be able to take you through now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hotton. Any questions from members? Councillor Efty.
Just to let you know, I will have a question, but I'd like Councillor Wilson take you through first.
Okay, all right, lovely. So none on the outline put forward to us by Mr. Hotton. At that point, as I said a little earlier, a warm welcome. Thank you for giving up your evening to come and join us, Stuart. Really appreciate that. I attended the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting last week along with the Deputy Leader, and I have to say I thought that it was extremely constructive. I do like this idea of putting through these reports that we hear at Executive, but it feels that a job is being properly done in the sense that they're being scrutinised, and then we listen to the outcome of that scrutiny process, and we consider the recommendations and move it from there. So if you've got any comments to make to us, I believe you have.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. What I would say, first of all, is that there was a positive response from members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to this report. if I go through the recommendations, if that's okay with you, the first recommendation, paragraph 1.2, which relates to paragraph 6.1 of the report, and this is about changing the relative figures for the budgets. I spoke to Mr Houghton about this before we had the meeting, and the figures in the budget are clearly indicative. I think what members of my committee were trying to get across was that perhaps we should be spending less on the promotion materials and more on training, and earmarking more for emerging projects as well. So members of my committee were hoping that we'd be quite ambitious with this programme. Do you want me to move on to the next?
Any questions at that point? Councillor FD.
Well, this was going to be my question. Where we've cut £5,000 off the £10,000 budget for promotion materials and branding, now over the last couple of years, I've had complaints that we don't seem to have a presence in Rochford with branding. Is this going to damage our presence in Rochford with our branding? We won't have enough, or have half what we were supposed to have, and still get complaints about what does Rochford Council do?
I'll take that as a, if we can just hold the reply there. Councillor Ward, did you?
Very much, Chairman. It was in a similar vein, actually. I believe we've got a considerable amount in reserve on that budget. I think it's an extra 30,000, is that correct? I do really, I'm listening to Councillor FD's concerns with regard to marketing, and I do think it's important. And maybe we should be leaving that, but giving the extra to the skills and training, rather than moving that around. Is that possible to do that?
We'll hold that one as well.
Thank you.
If we may. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to make the same point as Councillor Ward and Councillor FD. £5,000 feels like a very modest sum of money. And we've got to remember this will probably be covering at least 3 town centres, I'd imagine Rochford, Hockley and Rayleigh. I don't think £5,000 is adequate for that piece of work. No issue with increasing the amount for the skills and training to £10,000, but I would certainly be more comfortable if the budget for branding and promotion was £10,000 still.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Any other comments before I make mine? I think we've all picked up on that particular point. When I first read this before it went to scrutiny, I have to say I don't like such round figures, in the sense I appreciate that they're indicative, but to be asking to sign off on particular lines where we don't know the actual amounts doesn't sit comfortably with me. And I think overview and scrutiny took it to a further level of trying to play around with round amounts but not actually having an informed position on exactly how much each line might be. I understand the spirit in which they were trying to do that, but I don't think it's a particularly sensible thing to try and start guesstimating what we might need in terms of bands. So I'm quite uneasy at accepting that recommendation personally, because I'd like to see more precise figures. It's not because I'm in any way disagreeing with overview and scrutiny. I think the spirit was well intended. I think I'd like to see some more accurate figures. So just to sort of say, well, let's knock 5,000 off here and we'll add it somewhere else, just seems a little random to me, and I'd like to see a more informed view personally before we accept that recommendation. So with those 4 comments, I think pretty similar in vein, we'll pass over to Mr Houghton to give a reply, and we'll decide where we're going to go with that recommendation, if we may.
Thank you. So I think the budgets were merely indicative. I mean, there wasn't the original report didn't allude to a decision on those as such, but it's more for information. So in terms of I think what was raised by overview and scrutiny, I can understand there was a concern how that could reflect priorities. I think they were interpreting that as a priority that should be given to training over sort of marketing. But I think there is ample budget to address the priorities of both. I think within reserves, if required. It was just merely indicative of how the spend could be delivered over that year. But it isn't something that was a decision for that evening, or really something we anticipate too much discussion around.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, do you want to come back on that?
I think it's a fair discussion. It's a fair point you've made. I was myself a little bit uneasy about putting specific figures down after having had the conversation with Mr Houghton. So it's really, I think, if I can sort of paraphrase what other council have said, if we can spend more on training than is indicated. I think that's the... I haven't got a figure in mind, but I just think that would be...
Do you know, Councillor Wilson, I don't think there's any difference between us, actually. We're all
Yeah.
saying the same thing.
Yeah.
But I think what we're saying is those are fair headings, but to start putting an actual figure to them without actually having a more precise rationale for how we arrive at that, we understand actually the spirit and actually agree with the spirit, but to start putting figures, it looks as if, well, we've allowed 30,000, so let's see how we can just split it around. I think the executive's view would be, we want to get the job done properly under all those headings, and whatever is the appropriate cost. I don't think that actually affects the overall recommendation of the report, but the message, I believe, from the executive, and I think it dovetails into overview and scrutiny, is whatever it costs to get the job done properly, mindful of the comments made at overview and scrutiny, which I thought were very helpful, but also not constraining to those headings. Is that approach acceptable? Thank you. Thank you, members. Right. I don't think 1.3 to 1.8 might be quite so difficult, but take us through them, please, Councillor Wilson.
Within the report, there were no clear smart KPIs in there. And again, in discussion with Mr Houghton, this is a strategy, so you wouldn't expect lots and lots of detail in there. The only thing I would say is that you would expect perhaps high-level KPIs at this stage, so we know where we're heading.
Any questions or comments on that? Councillor Ward.
Yes, thank you. I think there was an indication on performance in here, but I think this was such a high-level view. I think as you start moving forward and you move into it, I think you've got to have the performance indicators coming forward. So, I mean, you've highlighted that, but I think it probably didn't come out in this report. I think it's indicated in this report, but it doesn't jump out at you. Maybe that's a fault.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Councillor Efty.
Again, no problem with the KPIs. It's just I was at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee as well, and I think there was a point made that when they get reported back, what sort of timescale? Would it be a rolling timescale? Would it be 6 months, then 3 months, then 3 months to overview and scrutiny? So that may be something that could be answered.
Mr Houghton, do you wish to reply?
Thank you. I'm pretty good to Dan because Daniel couldn't hear just to comment on the timescale. I mean, I think traditionally there's an implementation plan that underpins the strategy. And you'd find that the KPIs would be within that. But I think it's the timescale for the implementation plan when that be brought forward that Daniel should be able to answer.
Thank you. Yes, so I mean, traditionally we've produced separate implementation plans, and they tend to be less formal documents, not public so much, and they would tend to contain KPIs. So I think what we'd be very happy to do is make the implementation plan essentially the reporting document that came back. So I mean, I'm fairly comfortable with agreeing to almost kind of quarterly, probably reporting on the performance. Understanding some months there might be, some quarters there may be less to report. I think we can easily give an indication of KPIs. I think they'll be fairly standard around business growth, number of businesses, key kind of infrastructure projects that have been completed in that window. But I think in a sense the objectives were included to indicate the types of things that will be focused on, and the KPIs would probably be subject to separate reporting. That's traditionally how we've dealt with it.
Councillor Ward.
Yeah, I'm just making an assumption here now. I guess that as the plan progresses, you will then be able to measure how well it is progressing and the work that is being done on it. So I think that's probably a fairer way of understanding how this will actually develop. Again, high level, once you start getting in place what you want to do and how you're doing it, then you can measure, are you doing it? Are you doing it on time? Has it been done to your satisfaction?
Councillor Ward, I think that's absolutely right. But to summarise on that point, if I may, I think it was quite clear, and if I'm reading the message correctly, it's about having a clear understanding of outcomes, what the time frame is for those outcomes, and the reporting mechanism. Councillor Wilson, I don't want to put words into your... but are you happy
Do
with that?
whatever is- yes, thank you.
Because I'd like that recorded,
Yep.
that there's some definitive reporting lines. We all understand what the outcome is and by what time, so that we can actually use some sort of RAG analysis to
Yeah.
see we're on target, off target, or whatever.
Yeah,
Actually
and
get it.
if I could just add, Chair, that I spoke to Councillor Belton at the meeting, and this is exactly what she wants to take forward.
Yeah, lovely. All right, because I'm just very conscious that I don't then start twisting what.
No.
So as long as you're happy
Yeah.
as chairman, and we move on then to 1.4.
Yep, this is this is about keeping it local where we can, trying to do stuff within our own economy. If we're trying to grow our economy, then we should be using the resources within our economy rather than going outside of it. So it's really to try to look whether we can use local businesses more and including local schools as well, perhaps for some of the media work.
Any comment, Councillor Ward?
Actually, this is actually a point that Councillor Sperry made to me, and I'm just wondering if it has any bearing where, let's say, people apply for a job, and I know this where our company has applied for large jobs, large things to do, but we can't get in because there are so many different requirements. Now, I'm wondering if the smaller companies do struggle with actually getting an opportunity because the requirements that are put in there, they just can't meet, even though they would be really good, they would be ideal, but it's just the way that the forms are set out that become quite difficult for a small company to actually put in a bid and feel confident in putting in that bid, even though they could do the job. Am I getting that across?
Actually, I agree. Running a small business, I agree with that 100%. Very often we don't bother to tender for any large public bodies. It's just too difficult. But what I would say is that what we're not suggesting is that we go against procurement regulations. So I fully...
And the way that they're set out. I know that a lot of the forms were down to Europe, if I may say, Chairman. I wonder, now we're out of Europe, is there an opportunity to actually change the way that we actually construct those forms?
I think what we're probably all agreed on, and again, I don't want to put words in, is that the forms are user-friendly to appeal to, or to ensure that all businesses are able, including our local businesses. It's not restricting it just to corporates. But I sort of feel that as the Chief Executive has drawn his microphone towards him, he may want to give us some guidance.
Should be on.
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanted to pick up the levels of values we're putting in this proposal are very much below what we'd normally go out for a full procurement exercise. So we'd look for a number of proposals and quotes. So we're not looking at a full-blown procurement process for these types of values. Obviously, we go through the proper procurement methods and process been agreed by the council, but we wouldn't expect a small business or a large business for the value of £10,000 of putting in a full tender requirement. There will be a process, but hopefully not too onerous for any local business.
In that case, thanks for that clarification. I think that really sums up the fact that we want to make this very appealing to local businesses. Councillor Ward.
The point then to actually get that across, we want to invite local businesses to be able to come in and not be afraid to bid.
I think we've got the message, Councillor Ward. You know, we want to, in the first instance, be attractive to local businesses. Yeah. Mr. Houghton.
Thank you, but no, just for comfort, I'm thinking of recollecting of the sort of marketing and printing and the design that we've done for the economic development sort of work so far has all been sourced within the district. So it's, you know, I think that's already happening as the chief executive has already alluded to. You know, the amounts that we're dealing with aren't prohibitive. I think for basically 3 quotes we're putting it. There isn't too much of a too much onerous bidding to go on at this level. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Moving on to 1.5.
This was to do with, within the report itself, it mentions Rochford Local, and there were some concerns with members that we should also use Google Business as well, because it's got a wider reach on it rather than just look within the Rochford area. So it's a fairly, I would say, straightforward recommendation, hopefully.
Well, I think it's straightforward, but I will put it over to members to see whether they agree. Everyone agreed? Any further comment? Nope. Okay, agreed.
Thank you.
1.6.
Yeah, and this is really to try and achieve economies of scale working within Brentford Borough Council to see whether we can share resources on this and what lessons we can share with each other.
Well, it's what we want to do, and I think the point was made in the meeting that there is a perception, rightly or wrongly, that Brentwood may be a little bit further ahead with this sort of stuff than we are, and certainly we're in a position, hopefully, to benefit from their knowledge and expertise. But we all agree to that? Agreed? Okay. 1.7, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, this is perhaps a bit more contentious, and I would say this wasn't unanimously agreed at the meeting, which was to change the wording from fantastic connections to develop fantastic connections. And I know that Mr. Houghton probably thinks that we're underselling ourselves, so if you didn't want that recommendation, I don't think I'd be too upset.
Yeah. Members, any comments? Mr. Houghton.
If I may, having to drive through Lee at the weekend, we've got excellent infrastructure compared to other areas. I think we just forget that. So it's, I think it would be a shame to undersell ourselves. I think it's relative. I think we tend to give ourselves a hard time, but actually our infrastructure connections are of a good standard. So I think it's, you know, if you're going to sell yourself, you've got to put a good foot forward rather than keep making apologies. So I think fantastic infrastructure, in my opinion, ought to stay. Thank you.
Councillor Webb, help me out.
Thank you, Chairman. Just reading this paragraph. It currently says, with fantastic connections to key employment markets in Basildon, Thurrock and South Edmonton by road and rail. If it was changed to read, to encourage the development of fantastic connections to Basildon, Thurrock and South Edmonton, it will become a bit of a nonsense because we've already got fantastic connections to those areas. We've got rail links, we've got road links, we've got an airport on our doorstep. I'm not quite sure whoever came up with 1.7, I'm not quite sure what they envisaged could be done to further those connections. So it seems a bit of a non-starter as far as I can see.
I think the word fantastic is quite a strong word, isn't it? When we hear from residents, connectivity and driving to some of these places isn't quite as fantastic as the word it says implies, and I think that was the sort of spirit behind the comment. But Councillor Efty, help me out.
It's absolutely fantastic, so go with it.
Yeah. Councillor Wilson.
No, as I say, it wasn't voted on unanimously, and I don't like to sell the district short either. So,
I certainly don't want to do anything that suggests selling us short. So, sorry, Chief Executive.
Is that okay to come in? Thank you, Chairman. Yeah. Just, I think it's about audiences. This document's our economic development strategy. One of the key audience will be from an investment and sort of inspire people to come to Rochford to invest. I think you need to be as bold and with our outcome. If you say okay or words like that, fantastic connection would hopefully entice people rather than say we're getting there or it's coming soon. So I think we need to be really bold, and we have got great connections. Again, it's relative to the place locally on a level of everybody probably in the country feels they haven't got the right infrastructure. So I think we'd be with them. But we have got fantastic connections. We've got the only airport in Essex, or South Essex, on our patch. So we should be talking about that. We've got rail connections into Fenchurch Street and Liverpool Street, really good connections as well. It doesn't mean we can be complacent, but I would say we should be really bold and say we have got fantastic connections for the audience that's going to see this document.
Councillor Sparring.
I would agree with the comments that have been made, Chairman. It implies that we're playing catch-up again. And I think there are some things that we are ahead of the game on, and this is one of them. And I agree, it gives out a negative view, and we don't need to start trying to justify where we are. And
Thank you, Councillor Sparring. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't like the word fantastic particularly, but where it has encouraged the development of fantastic connections, can we not have to continue to encourage the development? We've done it anyway, so we're continuing. Just a thought.
Councillor Ward.
Well, the way I would read it and enhance it would be enhanced by our membership of a sailor, because that's exactly what it would do. Because I would read it, Rochford forms part of the South Essex economy with fantastic connections to key employment markets in Basildon, Thurrock and Southend-on-Sea by both road and rail, enhanced by our membership of, a joint membership of a sailor, which brings it all together. I would have liked to have seen a sailor in here.
I think that's a really good point, because it's proving that we can't do this all on our own.
Correct.
We're working with partners.
Yeah.
I'm with Councillor Williams in terms of the word fantastic, which we've got used in this era to using some very strong words. But then I think the Chief Exec makes a really good point, that you've got to be mindful of the audience that this is projected towards. And we can't sell ourselves short. We actually need to play it up. With that in mind, Councillor Wilson, what do you want us to do? Because these are your recommendations.
Thanks, Chairman. I'd like to go along with Councillor Ward's recommendation about putting a cellar in there as well. Notwithstanding the word fantastic, I'm not sure of a better word. I mean, it is a strong word, isn't it? And we shouldn't be selling ourselves short. And you know, when you look at it, I do think we take ourselves for granted.
Yeah, help me again, please, Councillor.
Believe in ourselves. Why should anybody else?
Okay. So I'm feeling the consensus, Councillor Williams.
It just seems to me a bit like Harry Potter, isn't it? You know, fantastic, and you know, that sometimes it's overrated, that word. I'm not sure about that, but fine.
And do you know, Councillor Williams, I'm sort of with you, but I don't want to sell us short. But I understand perhaps we live in an era where fantastic really was fantastic, but now these words are used more commonly, and perhaps we need to move into the new era, Councillor Williams, you and I.
Perhaps it's an age thing.
So on the basis that we don't seem to be able to do any better, we're going to leave it as it is, but add in a cellar. Is that all agreed? Is that fair enough?
Yes,
Lovely.
thanks, Chairman.
Okay. 1.8, Councillor Wilson.
Yep, this was came up from a number of members who were aware of schemes that other local authorities had undertaken, and it was to be ambitious with what we're doing and to look at other areas. And as I understand it, Chelmsford City Council have got some good schemes going on about regenerating the High Street, and it's just a suggestion to look at that scheme to see whether we can learn any lessons and whether we can bring any thing to bear in the district.
Yes, Mr. Houghton. Oh, sorry, members, before we move to Mr. Houghton. Councillor FD.
Don't want to limit it to Chelmsford City Council. That's nice, is EG's Chelmsford City Council, but we should be looking at all councils who are doing a really good job of regenerating their high streets and see what we can learn.
Thank you, Councillor FD. Any other member comments before I pass across? No. was in Raleigh High Street this weekend. I think Chelmsford could probably take a lesson from how we do things in Raleigh. It was absolutely brilliant, and congratulations, as an aside, to everyone involved with Trinity Fair. I thought it was fantastic, and I'm using it in the sense that I mean it. To actually, for us to be out there in that sort of high street, I thought it was brilliant, fantastic, extraordinary, and any other strong word that I can find in the English dictionary. So I do agree with you, Councillor FD. I think EG is appropriate because it is one area, but I think we should be open to exploring any other town. We should actually be looking at partners. Sometimes it could be a more run-down town that has actually got a ambitious plan that we think we could buy into. But again, I don't want to sell ourselves short. When you look around the Rochford district, from Wakering in the east through to Raleigh in the west, we have got some fantastic parades of shops. We've got some fantastic sub-centres in the form of Rochford, Hockley, and you know, we should be very proud of that. But that doesn't mean to say we should be so smug that we don't actually take lessons from others. I did, when I was sitting in the audience, I did think to myself, well, why are we honing on Chelmsford? Because not everything is wonderful about Chelmsford. They have a few issues, and they haven't found the solutions to that. But I certainly take the spirit that we're open. So I would say E.g. Chelmsford and other places. There we are. Mr. Houghton, did you wish to add anything to that?
Only that, I mean, I think it's a given that you're always trying to share best practices across different sort of economic groups, you know. So, I mean, the Essex officers do meet regularly to discuss best practices across Essex, and would then also discuss case studies further afield. So I think it's almost a given, but I'm happy for it to be taken as a recommendation. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks. That takes us to the end of the recommendations. Bit of discussion around that. Councillor Wilson, did you wish to add anything before we move to?
No, thank you, Chairman.
Right, okay. Now, clearly we can't embrace all of that within the recommendations of the report, but certainly there is a clear agreement and value that Overview of Scrutiny have put on this report. Really appreciate that. Perhaps you can feed that back to your committee. But if you're happy, members, unless there's any further comments, we'll move to the recommendations set out.
Chairman, if I may, just for a overview as to what has been discussed, so all members are clear. In addition to the recommendations under paragraph 1, there appears to be a recommendation decision 1.3 to agree the following recommendations of overview and scrutiny. So to be clear, on the addendum, 1.2 is not accepted. Yeah, because 6.1 refers to anticipated costs, and it's been drawn down from a balance of 63,000. So paragraph 1.2a, sorry, is not accepted, B and C are. And the 10,000 to hold business network and other events remains as well. That's already in the report. 1.3, for there to be clear and smart measurable KPIs, accepted, and as Mr. Goodman has explained, this will be separate implementation plans. And with timescales, yes. 1.4 is accepted at the procurement of local schools and businesses. 1.5 is accepted with regards to encouraging business to use Google Business. 1.6, working with Brentwood Borough Council to develop skills, is accepted. 1.7 is not. However, members have agreed additional wording to page 7.7. I would suggest that in the last, on page 7.7, where it says, I know there was a lot of discussion around fantastic connections. So where the sentence starts, our region is also a key growth area. Perhaps you could say our region is also a key growth area for the government, supported by large investment in the Thames Freeport and Lower Thames Crossing, and our membership of Acela. Add those words at the end. Keep what we've got about the fantastic connections. If members are happy with that.
I would like to see Acela spelt out as Association of South Essex
Yes.
Local Authorities
Yeah.
with a cellar in brackets, because I
Yes.
think...
We add that to the end of the paragraph.
is that
for-
agreed, members? Yeah. So,
I think,
right, Councillor Sperring, you go.
I think Councillor Ward and myself have both hit the same thing, Chairman. Ms Laws mentioned 1.2 where we talked about section A not being agreed, but B and C were. I thought the understanding was that we would make sure that we had the money available to do the job properly.
Well, I was going to come back on 1.2, but I thought we'd just work through to the end and then still come back to 1.2, because I too am still uneasy about that. But let's bring in Councillor Ward.
I want to see greater clarity in our intention. Our intention is to actually be flexible in its use to get best out of what we need, where we need it and however we need it.
Well, in fairness to the monitoring officer, so 1.7, you've suggested some wording. We've
Yes, to add to the end of that paragraph, our region is also a key growth area for the government, supported by large investment in the Thames Freeport and Lower Thames Crossing and our membership of ACELA, but the full title of ACELA. No?
Well, if it doesn't work for you, Councillor Ward, the onus is on you to come up with something that works for you and see whether it can work for the rest of us.
I felt it should have come immediately after the Southend-on-Sea Both Road and area, enhanced by our membership of ACELA. It directly refers then back to that fantastic connection that is being made. Because then if you drop down, you've lost the point.
I'm glad I've got some good legal advisors near me tonight.
If I may just comment, I think the sentence relates to connections by road and rail and not the membership of ACELA, whereas of course the investment piece that is referred to as Freeport and Lower Thames Crossing is directly linked to the membership of ACELA. That's why the suggestion was that we should mention ACELA in the latter sentence, not the former.
And at that point, I'd like to bring Mr. Houghton back in, because he may...
Yes, thank you. If I can bring you back to the original report, and the decision 1.2 obviously is about sort of the idea of necessary minor amendments, which is changing to sentences and structures like is to be delegated down to myself and the portfolio holder for climate and economy. So I think what we can do is take this away, and we'll happily discuss that with Councillor Belton. But through Councillor Bell to yourselves as well about these sort of changes you want to make. I'm just conscious that it's becoming a discussion about precise sentences and wording, but that can be done, I think, outside of this executive, I would suggest, if people are content to do so.
Right, I'm just getting a little confused now about what point we are talking, what point we're talking about.
Can I come in, Chairman?
Yeah, Councillor Rowe.
Clarify. I think, Marcus, I think you've moved on to
Back to 1.2.
1.2 of the recommendations. We are actually still discussing 1.2 of the overview and scrutiny.
If I may, what I'm saying is I think you can pick those up through the original recommendation that some of these minor changes and changes to wording could be dealt with outside of this meeting.
Right, I just want to come back to the monitoring officer on 1.7 of the addendum. That's what I'd like to try and agree first. Yeah?
Chairman, there has been a suggestion by Councillor Ward and a suggestion by Ms Hutchins. Which would you like to go for?
A combination of the two.
I think, Chairman, I think we agreed that with Chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny, we can probably, outside of this meeting, we all agree that we need to add the words ACELA in there somehow in our membership. So we perhaps can come up with some wording outside of the meeting in consultation with the portfolio holder.
I think that seems to be a sensible way forward, doesn't it? Otherwise, we knee-jerk with something, but it does need to be...
Yeah. So 1.7 can read that reference to a seller be included on page 7.7 of the report. So it's noted that the decision has been made, so we'll come up with some wording that members are happy with.
Happy with that, Councillor Wilson? Yep. Okay, all right. Sorry, Councillor Rowe.
Can we then just make sure that you as leader are happy with that as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then 1.8 is agreed.
Right.
So Chairman, coming back to 1.2, I think
right.
the point...
Sorry, just before we move.
Yeah.
So I have ticks against well, I've got ticks against 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, 1.6. 1.7 is still subject to...
That will read that reference to a seller be included on page 7.7 of the report.
But there will be wording agreed outside of this meeting.
Yes.
1.8 is agreed, yeah. 1.2, I have to say, from my point of view, in the light of the feedback from overview and scrutiny and the comments passed here, I think there is unease at the figures being applied to the breakdown. The breakdown is agreed, but I'm not sure the figures, and I think from, if I'm reading it correctly, the executive agree with overview and scrutiny about the figures not actually tying up, but to just pluck figures out of the sky, and that's not being disingenuous to the writer of the report, but it would be better to leave those headings in there that talk about an overall figure of £30,000 with the detail, but I'm not quite sure how that can be wrapped up within the recommendation of the report.
So Chairman, that can be done. So it's we can say that on paragraph 6.1 of the report, it's noted that the appropriate sums be spent as agreed with the portfolio holder for climate and economy. I think it needs members. I mean, the balance. There is a balance of circa 63,000, and it is, as Ms. Tartan and Mr. Goodman said, it is an anticipated amount that to spend, but they cannot, as you say, put a definitive figure on it. But the headlines are there. You know, money will be used towards to improve place and promotion materials and branding, to hold business networking events, to invest in skills and training, including schools careers program, and a contingency to adjust projects that emerge throughout the year. I think the important figure is that there is a budget of 63,000 for this spend.
Okay. So subject to all of that, because actually we are at one with agreeing, actually we're just having a continuing discussion really on from overview and scrutiny about those figures. But the key thing is the first part of 6.1, that paragraph with the headings rather than putting figures to those headings.
Yes, the portfolio holder would it would be within her remit to spend that money as it's already in reserves.
Okay, so with that all in mind, can we now turn to the recommendations at 1.1 and 1.2, or do you want us to get agreement on 1.1 through to 1.8?
So, Chairman, there'll be an additional recommendation or additional decision being made that 1.3, that it's agreed that the following recommendations of overview and scrutiny, as we have just discussed, is agreed.
Okay, all right. So, I think we're there. If everyone agrees. 1.1, that the draft economic development strategy be approved as set out in the appendix. Is that agreed? 1.2, that delegated authority be given to the Assistant Director, Place and Environment, in consultation with the portfolio holder, Climate and Economy, to make any necessary minor amendments to the draft economic development strategy in advance of publication. Agreed? And a further recommendation, 1.3, that the recommendations from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee are supported subject to the further discussion that we've had.
Chairman, I will list the recommendations being 1.2 being on paragraph 6.1 of the report is noted that the appropriate sums within the 63,000 be spent on as agreed with the portfolio holder. 1.3 remains the same. 1.4 remains the same. 1.5 remains the same. 1.6 remains the same. 1.7, that reference to a seller be included on page 7.7 of the report, and 1.8 remains the same. So that will be listed in the final decision, as we discussed.
Thank you very much to the monitoring officer for guiding us through that very effectively. Is that all agreed, members? Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Wilson. You're most welcome to stay for our next item, or if you wish to take your leave, we understand.
It's only that I've got a very nice curry that was cooked and everyone will have eaten it by the time I get home. Thank you, Chairman.
So now, Councillor Wilson, everyone on the tape now knows that you've got curry tonight.
Yeah, beef Madras. Thank you, Chair.
Enjoy.
Thank you,
Right, thank you very much indeed for attending tonight. Really appreciate that. Right, members, moving on to item 8. I was a bit enthusiastic, Councillor Ward, to pull you in earlier, but now is your big moment, actually, to introduce this report.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Well, the decision being recommended is that the local plan transport assessment be commissioned using an allocation of up to £200,000 from the dedicated LDF reserve. Basically, we will need to have a transport assessment for this district, so we're able to understand our future planning. And if we don't have it, we will not know realistically whether we're making the right choices as far as the places we wish to put our jobs and our homes and other things around the district, because they have to be connected and we have to understand those connections. And this is probably, in my opinion, the most important evidential document that we're going to need going forward. I'd like to hand that over now to either Marcus or Daniel, who have been working very, very hard to bring this, bring this forward. Chairman.
Councillor Ward, thank you very much indeed. Which one of you is going to?
Thank you. Yes, so just so that members have a bit of an understanding. So we're obviously progressing with the local plan. We're looking to arrive at a kind of preferred option stage later this year. So it's quite a critical phase now in terms of making decisions about future strategy, obviously over a fairly long period of time. So the purpose of a local plan transport assessment really is to take a model-based approach to looking at the impacts of further growth in the district over a 20 to 30 year period. So by model-led assessment, what I really mean is that using data from kind of observed traffic and junction wait times and other data such as that, being able to draw real and realistic conclusions about the impacts of future development on those junctions and roads, but also being able to look at the mitigation that might be needed in the long term to make those impacts acceptable. And so it is a technical assessment. It will take probably the best part of 12 to 18 months to complete in full, but it will be a multi-staged assessment. So it will provide useful outputs to guide decision making throughout. So the timely and effective delivery of the local plan transport assessment is really intrinsically connected to the local plan timetable. So there is an imperative to commission an assessment such as this as soon as possible, really, to make sure that we are in a position to make informed decisions at the appropriate time. So I won't read the detail of the potential methodology now, but within the report there is quite a lot of detail about the approach that may be taken. One thing I would say is that what we are suggesting that we do is to use the South Essex model, which is operated by Jacobs. And the reason that we're suggesting that we do that is that it will provide quite significant cost savings relative to going out to procure a whole new model, mainly because clearly Jacobs via Essex County Council have already collected that data over a long period of time and won't be recharging us for use of that data. The other advantage is that it reduces the risk of duplication, because Jacobs' relationship with the County Council does mean that there is less need for things to be rerun and reconsidered, which inevitably would cause time and cost implications. But that's not to say that ultimately there's any level of deferral over decision making or the content. Ultimately, like with any evidence-based document, it is the Council's document. So we will be essentially the commissioning authority, and obviously we'll be expecting delivery of the brief against an agreed specification to the required standard. And so in that sense, we can be assured that it will be a robust assessment and will be reported on back to the executive and obviously at the appropriate time to the Planning Policy Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goodman. Right, two hands. Councillor Ward, do you want to come back first?
I think one of the most important factors is actually the scoping of what we do. We do have a vision going forward for the district, and that vision is ambitious, but we need to understand how much that ambition will cost us. And that's the whole idea of the scoping, to understand if we can do things or we can't do things. Obviously, there's no such thing as can't. The problem is the finance behind it, and that's the problem. So we need to understand, you know, is there a new road that could be needed? You know, and what would that cost? All these things are going to come in to the scoping. This is our plan. We are the piper, and they are going to be, you know, we're actually paying the piper to actually play this tune. So I think that's important.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Councillor FD.
Right, I don't quite know how to say this, but 2 points really. One, we've got a duty to cooperate with our neighbours, so we're not in a vacuum, we're not an island. So how will this cooperate with those, because our roads don't stop at our borders, they carry on through Southend, Basildon. So has that been will be taken into account? And also, I really don't know how to say this, but personal experience on committees, I don't really have very much faith in Meanway Jacobs.
Thank you, Councillor FD. I think I share your view. I think the point was made about the data capture, though. And if it's historic data capture, you can't actually go to another organisation to get the capture of it. That's how I read it. But I don't know whether either Mr. Houghton or Mr. Goodman, you want to comment?
Well, thank you. I mean, if I can just address the first point firstly quickly. So in terms of duty to cooperate, I think what's important is the South Essex model contains data from those other authority areas. So in terms of cross-boundary impacts, that will be part and parcel of that. There's no compartmentalisation of the network, if you like. So in that sense, there will be a lot of connectivity between that work. And likewise with Southend, which is obviously unitary, there'll be quite a lot of effort put in to make sure that there's some level of synergy in the inputs, at least in terms of the assumptions. And then obviously the outputs will be what they are, and we'll consider what they say. I mean, what I would just say about the Jacobs aspect, I think as they are the County Council's consultant, and obviously the County Council is the statutory authority for highways work, clearly there's a need to going into a local plan examination really to have the support of the highway authority, that your work is sufficiently robust and that can be supported. But that's not to say that obviously there isn't a role for members and the council more generally to make sure that as the work progresses iteratively that you're happy with the direction it's going in. And I would hope that that would mitigate any risks of dissatisfaction at the end result. But I think the reasons that we're suggesting this avenue are set out in the report, and they are quite, from my perspective, fairly profound in terms of cost and duplication.
Yes, certainly, Councillor.
Yeah, I take on everything you say, and I understand the cost implications of duplicating work and all the rest of it. Now, you mentioned members will be kept up to date and the way it's going. Now, I'm more peace with that, to actually be kept up to date. And what would that mean?
Thank you. So, I mean, traditionally, what we probably would have done is taken things iteratively to the Planning Policy Committee. However, I think the recommendation in this report does also talk about reporting to the executive. So I think probably what we would do, and probably as we reach or approach milestones, is we'll probably bring reports to the executive that contain information to be discussed. I wouldn't want to necessarily give a regularity of that time frame, because it might be the nature of the work means that a lot gets done in one quarter and then it's a lot of background work in the next.
Thank you. It makes me feel more comfortable.
Councillor Sperring.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, having read the report and listened to officers and then the answers they've given to Councillor FD and Councillor Ward's comments, I mean, it seems to be that nowhere for us to go. We have to go down this road of getting this report done. We need it for our local plan, and this is the best and most logical way of obtaining the information we need to carry on and do our local plan, make sure we get that through. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Houghton.
Thank you. I agree with your comments, but just to go back and to clarify if there's any confusion between the role of the executive and the planning policy group. So I think the progress on that will report back into the planning policy initially, and then to come on to the executive afterwards. You know, there's a different role there, so it'll be quite clear. From an executive point of view, you're really sort of understanding the delivery of the contracts is what we brought here for this evening, but the merits of the actual, if you like, quality of the and impact that it will have upon our policies and local plan is for the planning policy group to decide, but they can report into the executive afterwards. I just want to be quite clear of that structure, because there may be some confusion around that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All I would add in terms of the concern about Ringway Jacobs is that there is not a presumption or an assumption that because they are the county highways experts, they always have the answer. You know, there ought to be a checking balances approach, so that we don't just dismiss things. Well, they're the experts, so they must be right. I think that's the point that we're making, if I read the message correctly, that we just don't dismiss it and say, well, they know what they're doing. We've got to sort of just interrogate some of the data, but as I think was also said, that becomes some of the more detail that goes through the Planning Policy Committee. This is a high-level strategic document. Do I sum that up pretty fairly? Yeah, but that gives members a degree of comfort. Okay. The other thing I would like to mention before moving to the recommendations is an email which I passed on to Councillor Ward. It came from Councillor Cripps. Now, first of all, I have to commend Councillor Cripps for reading the report and asking some questions. They're not actually questions that we can necessarily answer tonight, because they are more appropriately addressed through the Planning Policy Committee. But I do want to acknowledge that those questions are there. They were sent to the Chief Exec and myself a couple of days ago, and I would wish them to be fed into the deliberations so that Councillor Cripps is given an interim reply and assured that they will be addressed in more detail. So the courtesy of a response, any reply that you're able to give would be helpful, but it may be that the Planning Policy Committee addresses them in more detail as part of their deliberations. Is that fair? Yeah? Okay, good. No other points or questions? Okay, which takes us then to the decisions being recommended at 1.1, that a local plan transport assessment be commissioned using an allocation of up to £200,000 from the dedicated LDF reserve. Is that agreed? And at 1.2, that the Assistant Director Place and Environment in liaison with the portfolio holder for strategic planning be delegated authority to oversee the delivery of the local plan transport assessment and report on its progress to the Executive. Members, is that agreed? Agreed. with that, that concludes the agenda for tonight. I'd like to thank all members for your attendance tonight. Thank you too for all officers present and being here. And thank you all. And with that, wish you a very good night.